The tragedy of Bobby Charlton, how he lives, is sad. And it didn't start with his death in 2023. It began decades earlier after surviving the tragic crash that was the Munich Air Disaster in 1958. Most people think Bobby Charlton lived a charmed life. World Cup winner, Ballon d'Or champion, Manchester United legend. But what if behind all those medals and praise was a man many couldn't stand? What if the greatest English footballer of all time was actually one of the loneliest? Bobby Charlton's career looked perfect from the outside. He scored 249 goals for Manchester United, a record that stood for decades. He captained England to World Cup glory in 1966. He won the Ballon d'Or that same year. He survived Munich when 8 of his teammates died. The public saw a hero, a gentleman, a role model, but those closest to him saw something very different. The first crack appeared in his own family. When Bobby married Norma Ball in 1961, it sparked a feud that would tear the Charlton household apart for over 40 years. His brother Jack, also a football legend, watched as Bobby slowly drifted away from everyone who had supported him. The tension got so bad that Bobby stopped seeing his own mother, Sissy, after 1992. Think about that. He didn't speak to the woman who raised him for 4 whole years until she died in 1996. Jack Charlton was furious about this. In his 1996 autobiography, he openly blamed Norma for turning Bobby against his family. Jack said Bobby had completely changed after marriage, becoming cold and distant. Bobby hit back hard, calling Jack's claims about his wife absolutely disgraceful. In his own book, years later, the two brothers, who had once been best friends, now couldn't stand each other. Bobby even admitted he just didn't want to know Jack anymore. This wasn't just a private family matter either. The media covered their bitter feud extensively. Here were 2 England World Cup heroes, brothers who should have been celebrating their shared success, instead washing their dirty laundry in public. It made Bobby look stubborn, prideful, and unable to put family before his wife's feelings. But the family drama was nothing compared to what happened at Manchester United. Bobby's relationship with George Best, his teammate in the famous Holy Trinity alongside Dennis Law, became absolutely toxic. Best was 9 years younger than Bobby and represented everything about the swinging 60s that the older, more conservative Charlton couldn't understand. Best famously said about Bobby, "I wish I could hear him say fuck just once." This wasn't meant as a joke. It showed how uptight and holier-than-thou Bobby had become. Best saw Bobby as someone who looked down on others, someone who thought he was morally superior to everyone around him. The tension between them got so bad that they literally stopped passing to each other during matches. Can you imagine 2 of the greatest players in United's history refusing to work together on the pitch because they hated each other so much? Best also accused Bobby of being part of United's problems in the post-Matt Busby era. When Best was only 22, but already past his peak, he felt it was time for older players like Bobby to step aside. Instead, Bobby clung on, and Best saw him as someone blocking the club's progress. Meanwhile, Bobby grew increasingly frustrated with Best's drinking and unprofessional attitude. With manager Frank O'Farrell failing to take control, the dressing room became a battlefield where these 2 legends allowed their personal hatred to fester. The breaking point came in 1972 during Bobby's testimonial match. This should have been a celebration of his career, a chance for teammates to show respect. Instead, George Best refused to play. He initially claimed he had an ankle injury, but later admitted it would have been hypocritical for him to take part. Best did turn up to watch, but he left after just 5 minutes and went to a pub, where he reportedly threw darts and eggs at a portrait of Bobby Charlton. Think about how humiliating that must have been. Your own teammate, someone you'd shared incredible success with, publicly rejecting you on what should have been your special night. It became a symbol of just how isolated Bobby had become within his own club. Denny Law, the 3rd member of the Holy Trinity, also had problems with Bobby. Sources say Bobby was not on speaking terms with both Best and Law at various points. The United dressing room in Bobby's final years became so toxic that former goalkeeper Alex Stepney recalled long days when they would simply not speak to each other. This wasn't just personality clashes, it had real professional consequences for the team's performance. Manchester United's decline in the early 1970s coincided with these internal feuds. The club that had conquered Europe in 1968 was relegated to the second division by 1974. While Bobby left in 1973, many felt his inability to bridge the generational gap, and his conflicts with key players contributed contributed directly to the club's struggles. His conflict with Best was so severe it affected their on-field partnership, with both players admitting they stopped passing to each other during matches. Even after retiring, Bobby couldn't escape controversy. In 1970, he'd been caught up in the Bogota bracelet incident in Colombia, where he and Bobby Moore were accused of stealing jewelry. Though Bobby wasn't arrested like Moore was, and the charges were eventually dropped, suspicion lingered around both players. Later, in 2005, many Manchester United fans were furious when Bobby publicly apologised to the Glazer family after their controversial takeover of the club. Fans saw this as Bobby being completely out of touch with ordinary supporters' concerns about American ownership. The pattern was clear throughout his life. Bobby Charlton had a talent for creating distance between himself and the people who should have been closest to him. Whether it was family, teammates, or fans, he seemed unable to maintain warm relationships once conflicts arose. His reserved, shy personality, which the public saw as humble and dignified, often came across as cold and judgmental to those who knew him personally. Best even made cruel jokes about Bobby's family problems, sarcastically naming Bobby's mother Sissy as his biggest influence. This showed how Best was willing to exploit the family rift to further needle Bobby, creating a complex web of personal conflict that went far beyond simple professional disagreements. The saddest part came in Bobby's final years. In November 2020, he was diagnosed with dementia, the same disease that had already claimed his brother Jack earlier that year. The irony was heartbreaking. Just as the two brothers might have found comfort in each other during their declining health, it was too late. Jack had died in July 2020, taking any chance of a proper reconciliation to his grave. Bobby withdrew from public life completely after his diagnosis. The man who had once been the face of English football became invisible, hidden away in a nursing home. When he died in October 2023 after a fall that caused trauma to his lungs, it felt like the end of an era, but also like the conclusion of a very lonely journey. His death left Sir Geoff Hurst as the last surviving member of England's 1966 World Cup final team. The tributes that poured in after his death were genuine and heartfelt. Prince William attended his funeral at Manchester Cathedral. Manchester United honoured him extensively with black armbands, wreaths, and a minute's silence. The football world mourned a true legend, but even in death, the complexity of his character remained. Yes, he was a footballing genius and a survivor of terrible tragedy, but he was also someone who struggled to maintain the relationships that should have sustained him through life. Perhaps that's the real tragedy of Bobby Charlton. Not that he died, but that he lived so many of his later years estranged from the people who mattered most. His feud with Jack lasted 4 decades before their 2008 reconciliation. His conflicts with Best and Law poisoned his final years at United and contributed to the club's decline. His inability to connect with teammates and modern fans left him increasingly isolated as football moved beyond him. Yet despite everything, when Bobby Charlton died, the nation grieved, because for all his faults, for all the relationships he damaged, he was still ours. He was still the boy who survived Munich, who lifted the World Cup, who scored those incredible goals. The tragedy isn't that people hated Bobby Charlton, it's that he made it so hard for them to love him. But in the end, perhaps that makes his story more human, not less. Even legends can be lonely. Legends can be lonely.